I mean, when you got thumbnails like this, you know that this is a channel coming from a great creator with some really smart stuff.
Are you kidding? Rytoast copies one of my thumbnails from 6 months ago and he gets the MatPat shoutout? Come on. FNAF fans need to chill out. Thanks for watching. Seriously though, we do need to chill out just generally speaking, but everyone also needs to chill out regarding MatPat's latest theory, which has once again set the internet ablaze. Fans are unhappy with the theory for a variety of reasons. Some accused MatPat of looking for lore in the wrong places, while others seem to just loathe the idea that Afton will inevitably be a large part of Security Breach's upcoming Ruin DLC. Some still just really hate the idea that Gregory is a robot, and some I think just don't like MatPat and want him to be wrong. Probably because he's rich and famous and smart and talented and successful. Make no mistake, I don't feel that bad for MatPat. He's laughing at the haters on Twitter while they promote his ridiculously successful video for him. However, I think the response to his latest video is indicative of a huge problem in the FNAF community. It's one thing to be passionate about a series, but FNAF fans sometimes take things way too far, taking opinions personally and even going as far as to wish death upon others over FNAF. I can relate to this. My channel is only a fraction of MatPat's size, and I've been on the receiving end of some really disgusting stuff. While harassing someone over their FNAF opinions is obviously unacceptable, only a vocal minority of FNAF fans actually go that far. Every community has some toxicity in it, and trust me, the majority of this fandom is incredibly awesome. Unfortunately, there are other consequences to people throwing temper tantrums over Five Nights at Freddy's lore. I would go so far as to argue that this is exactly the type of behavior that drove FNAF to where it is today. The fanbase is divided, the story has taken a very sharp turn from where it began, and most importantly, the creator has been ousted from his own community and has been all but absent for over a year. You know what else is really dumb? The way YouTube changed the subscribe button. It's impossible to find now. December 13th, 2015. FNAF 4 had been released 6 months prior, and Scott had made it clear that it was to be the final game in the series. We expected it to tie up the prior game's loose ends and finally give some insight as to what the heck was going on in this bizarre story, but months later, we as a community were still pretty stumped. The game gave us a lot of obvious clues, but what wasn't clear was how they all fit together and how things connected to the prior 3 games. Nobody could really figure out what Scott's grand conclusion to Five Nights at Freddy's actually meant. Everything changed that winter afternoon when MatPat dropped the dream theory.
What if everything in FNAF was just a dream?
His video accounted for everything, and it even answered questions that many of us had never asked. I mean, seriously, did anyone care about Balloon Boy's origins? For once, we had a FNAF game and an associated MatPat theory from which pretty much everything could be solved. As fans of this mystery, you'd expect that everyone would be thrilled. MatPat finally did it. He finally solved FNAF.
Today, we solve FNAF.
We now knew everything that had happened in the first 4 games, and we could all go home, right? Surely nobody could possibly have a problem with an outcome like that. Just kidding, people were really upset. While MatPat's theory accounted for everything and wrapped up the FNAF story in a dark, tragic, fitting way, there was a cost. You see, Scott only had one out to reconcile the lore of the first 3 games in a coherent way, by revealing them all to have been in the crying child's dreams. Of course, saying it was all just a dream felt like a cop-out to a lot of us. I admit, I wasn't thrilled with this theory either, and I was somewhat relieved when Scott ultimately changed his mind and decided not to go forward with Dream Theory. He decided not to reveal what was in the box at the end of FNAF 4 because, in his own words, he didn't think that we as fans would accept it. Nor did we accept it. Just like with MatPat's latest video, Dream Theory had the fandom freaking out. Some people were so desperate for it to not be true, they started attacking MatPat personally, ignoring compelling evidence, and just overall acting like children. Some even attacked Scott, which made especially little sense. Clearly people were being driven by their emotions rather than their thoughts, and clearly some of them were actually children. Up until now, the fandom had never turned on Scott before. There weren't any major controversies like this upon FNAF 1 through 3's release, and the developer had never faced this kind of backlash before. I suspect that Scott just wasn't quite prepared to deal with this sort of response, and rather than sticking to his guns, he acquiesced to the fans' demands and put Dream Theory on the shelf. He went on to make Sister Location, Pizzeria Simulator, and other games, but this marked a major tonal shift in FNAF. Specifically, this is the moment that the series started to move away from horror and introduced more science fiction concepts. Dream Theory kept FNAF's story grounded in reality, relegating completely unrealistic things like autonomous animatronics in the 80s and springlock suits to dreams within the game. game. Seriously, look at FNAF 4's minigames. The animatronics aren't any more advanced than the Chuck E. Cheese animatronics were. We never see them interacting with guests or doing anything especially impressive. They just sort of sit there on the stage, bobbing their heads up and down. Whenever a mascot does appear off stage, Scott explicitly goes out of his way to show us that it's a person in a costume, not an autonomous robot. When we consider that FNAF's gameplay was all meant to take place within dreams and that this is the real world, we realize that there's almost nothing supernatural or inexplicable going on whatsoever. The fabric-based FNAF 1 animatronics were a manifestation of the crying child's Fredbear plushies. Notice his Foxy is all ripped and messed up, just like Foxy is in FNAF 1. The FNAF 2 animatronics were all based on the newer, more high-tech Fredbear and Friends action figures. This is why the toy animatronics are named the way they are, as well as why they have a hard plastic outer shell, rather than the plushie-inspired designs of FNAF 1. At one point in the game, we come across a girl with a Spring Bonnie toy, which she remarks is a finger trap. This toy, alongside some other things that the crying child witnessed and misunderstood, were the inspirations for Springtrap and FNAF 3. All of the bizarre, inexplicable stuff in the early FNAF games is wrapped up neatly under Dream Theory, and the reality that we're left with is a dark, tragic ending to a horror story. There were no high-tech robots walking around interacting with guests. They were just basic-ass animatronics like the ones that actually existed in the 80s and 90s. There was no evil purple person murdering children and stuffing them into suits. There were no nonsensical doors that required power in order to stay closed. And there were no moronic security guards who kept coming back to this horrific, life-threatening job for an entire week. There was just a kid who developed an irrational fear of the local pizza joint's mascots after being locked in the parts and service room. We don't know if this was a cruel prank by his brother or if this was just an accident, but it's not unreasonable that being trapped in this room would cause the crying child to develop a phobia of the animatronics. Furthermore, he sees some other things that he doesn't understand, and his imagination takes hold. He decides that horrible things must be happening at this establishment, and the ghost stories that the neighborhood kids tell only further fuel his paranoia. He has horrific nightmares in which he's trapped in the pizzeria, unable to leave and forced to defend himself from distorted, nightmarish versions of the animatronics he knows. It's not real though, it's all in his head, just like the first 3 games. It all ends when at his birthday party, the crying child's brother lifts him into Fredbear's mouth to give him a kiss. Fredbear's jaw clamps down and the crying child's head is smashed in. He falls into a coma, during which he has one final nightmare. No longer a security guard, the child finds himself alone in his bedroom, forced to have one final showdown with his fears. This time though, they barely resemble the mascots we've come to know. They are truly nightmares. That was how Scott intended to end FNAF, as a horror story. However, when us fans rejected MatPat's theory, Scott basically had no choice but to go back and add in all the science fiction stuff to try and justify these crazy things. He gave us a solution that didn't necessitate illusion discs or Fazgoo or anything like that, but we as fans rejected it. We made it clear to Scott that we wanted these events to literally have taken place in the series canon, and for better or for worse, Scott gave us what we wanted. That's what led to Sister Location, to the book, and now to Security Breach. In light of this, I think people need to take a deep breath and chill out regarding MatPat's latest theory and Security Breach's DLC. Sure, I'm sick of Afton too, and I think the Blob is a cheap way to reintroduce these old characters again in a misguided attempt to placate us old fans. I think robot people are dumb, and I think Gregbot is dumb. However, this is where FNAF's story has gone, and if we've learned anything from the whole Dream Theory debacle, changing things at the last second in an attempt to appease fans is not a good idea. Us fans know nothing, and at least some of us will always complain no matter what direction Scott and Steel will take the series. They need not concern themselves with our response, they should just make the game that they set out to, and make it as good as it can be. Afton and the old characters being back for the billionth time is dumb, but it'd be even dumber to have all this build up for Burntrap and Security Breach's base game only for the plot point to be completely abandoned in the DLC. There's no way that could result in a satisfying experience. MatPat's theory is pretty compelling, and honestly, if we're stuck with Afton for the time being anyway, a game where we travel into the Blob's mind and interact with the spirits contained within could be really cool. Imagine being able to travel through the locations from the earlier games, putting each soul to rest one by one while the Afton glitch tries to stop us. That sounds neat. It's not my #1 choice for where I'd like the story to be, but it could be cool. Ultimately though, fans will be fans. We're going to complain no matter what. It's Scott and Steelwool's job to know better than us and stick to their plans even when the reception isn't universally positive. We are not the game developers, they are, and they should go with their guts. I truly believe FNAF could be in a more interesting place today had Scott stuck with Dream Theory theory, rather than abandoning it in a panic the moment that us fans had a knee-jerk reaction to it. Sure, at the time it felt like a cop-out, but looking back, I think I like the dream ending more than what we eventually got. MatPat made 2 videos. One was Dream Theory, and the follow-up tried to explain the FNAF lore as if it wasn't a dream, as if it had all happened. Considering how bizarre and complicated that video got, is it really any surprise that FNAF went completely off the rails right around this point? Again, when MatPat first proposed Dream Theory, I too felt like it was a big cop-out. The notion that these first 3 games that we had such fond memories for were just a child's dreams, that they never actually happened, there was no Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, no phone guy, no purple guy, no killer animatronics, no murders, nobody getting stuffed. It was just a dream? Yeah, I completely understand why so many of us rejected this conclusion. It's actually a lot harder to stomach than Afton returning again for the billionth time. Sometimes though, you have to trust your gut. Scott trusted his gut when he made FNAF 1 as a last-ditch effort to succeed in games, and it led to tremendous success. He let us fans convince him to ditch his FNAF 4 dream idea, and I believe the series' story suffered as a result. Now we're at yet another crossroads. MatPat has put forth a compelling theory, and some fans are very unhappy with it. Will Scott and Steel Wool change their plans, attempt to please everyone, and end up pleasing no one with a rushed conclusion? Or will they stick to their guns and say, no, we're the game developers, this is the story we set out to tell, and that's what we're doing? Who knows? Hopefully they go with the latter. Regardless though, don't blame MatPat for influencing Scott or Steel Wool or whatever. That's definition shooting the messenger. While I do suspect that Scott has been influenced by MatPat's videos throughout the years, I'm not sure that was a good thing. And that was never MatPat's fault to begin with. It's a creator's responsibility to keep their audience at arm's length from their creations and not allow themselves to be negatively influenced by their critics. For years, Scott could do no wrong to the FNAF community, and I think he was sort of taken aback by the extreme negative reception that Dream Theory got. I think he just sort of panicked and quickly tried to undo the story he had planned to tell this whole time. Things are different now though. Scott isn't directly involved with the community anymore, and Steel Wool is handling the development work. I'm optimistic that these guys are pros and won't make the same mistakes with Security Breach's Ruin DLC. So if you're unhappy with MatPat's latest theory, just chill. Maybe he's wrong. Maybe the DLC will be totally different. Maybe he's right, but the DLC ends up being really cool and you end up enjoying it. Maybe it'll suck. Who knows? Regardless, none of those outcomes would be MatPat's fault. There's no way a YouTube video can have any influence on Security Breach's DLC. There's nothing to worry about. I think what actually upsets people is that they know that, as usual, MatPat is probably right. They just don't want him to be right. Like I said before, don't shoot the messenger. Thanks for watching.